It's time to review Asura's Wrath for the Xbox 360. Asura's Wrath is the utterly insane, ridiculous, and downright demented brainchild of much-loved gaming developer CyberConnect 2, who have gained a reputation in the gaming industry over the last couple of years for creating very authentic anime experiences in their products, such as Solo Torobo the Red Hunter, and in particular the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm games. Anyone who's experienced CyberConnect 2's work can tell you that they are essentially a big bunch of anime fanboys whose dream was to one day create an anime that would go down in history as one of the greats, alongside stuff like Fist of the North Star, Dragon Ball Z, Neon Genesis Evangelion, and more. Or, at the very least, to create something that would make for an epic anime. And Asura's Wrath is pretty much the culmination of that, since it pays tribute to many anime tropes and TV shows, and even its presentation is like an anime, with commercial breaks that appear halfway into each level, the levels being referred to as episodes, and even having next episode previews at the end of each level. Being developed over the course of at least a year and a half, Asura's Wrath was published by Capcom and released in early 2012. However, it met low sales and ended up with very mixed reviews and hugely divided opinions due to its highly unusual style. And after many months of being interested in it, I was finally able to buy the game, and it's time to see, is the game really as odd as people make it out to be? The answer, yes. Asura's Wrath concerns a very angry man named Asura, one of the mighty 8 Guardian Generals whose goal is to defend the planet Gaia from the evil forces of the impure Goma. However, Asura is betrayed by his 7 Guardian General comrades, is framed for killing their emperor, his wife is killed, his daughter Mithra is kidnapped to assist with the great rebirth the generals are playing, and Asura himself is sent quite literally to the depths of hell for 12,000 years. So when he somehow comes back to life, he's a bit miffed about things. And so our livid, screaming idiot sets out to rescue Mithra, get revenge on the Guardian Generals, now known as the 7 deities, and try to defend the innocent from the increasing threat of the Goma. Unlike most games, Asura's Wrath doesn't settle for one specific kind of gameplay. Rather, it changes gameplay styles quite often, but usually as one of 3 certain types. A beat-em-up similar to Devil May Cry and CyberConnect 2's Ultimate Ninja Storm games, a third-person shooter eerily similar to Space Harrier where you run towards enemies or fall from the sky while shooting at them, or, probably the most common one of them all, tons of quick-time events, where you have to press the button corresponding with the on-screen prompt in order to clear a particular part. However, despite the many kinds of gameplay, the controls are largely the same. You jump with the A button, use melee attacks by pressing B, fire tiny fists at enemies with X, activate heavy attacks by pressing Y, although that function has to recharge every time you use it, dodge attacks by pressing the right bumper while moving in a certain direction, and lock onto enemies with the left bumper. On the top of the screen there are 3 meters, the health meter monitoring how much damage you can take, the unlimited meter, and the burst meter, the latter 2 being particularly important. When you attack enemies, both meters fill up, and when the unlimited meter is filled, you can activate a brief period of invincibility and extra strength by pressing the left trigger. Meanwhile, when the burst meter is filled, you can activate it by pressing the right trigger and automatically access the next part of the level. This is particularly important since enemies infinitely respawn and bosses don't get damaged unless you activate the burst meter. Now, considering that Asura's Wrath is essentially a game that wants to be an anime, it shouldn't be too surprising that most of its problems are based around what it wants to be. For starters, the ratio between cutscenes and gameplay is ridiculous, sometimes even more so than games like Metal Gear Solid or Bayonetta. Now look, I understand that cutscenes are very important when conveying the story of a game, especially one as story-heavy as Asura's Wrath. But here's the thing, when you have a 30-minute episode where the gameplay lasts 1 whole minute, something has gone very pear-shaped. The gameplay can also get pretty tedious at times, since some episodes are spent doing nothing more than hitting enemies over and over until you can activate the next big QTE sequence, and episode 9 is the worst offender in that case. And some of the game's episodes feel like they go on for far longer than they should. That's not to say the gameplay is bad, but when you're not doing incredibly over-the-top nonsense, it can get a bit dull. Another issue is that your involvement in Asura's Wrath can feel quite limited, as it seems that you're either watching really awesome cutscenes that you have no control over other than pressing Y every once in a while, or properly playing the game for a period of 1 or 2 minutes. It's as if the game doesn't really want you to get involved and would just prefer you sat back and go, ooh, every time a sword stabs the earth. Which would be fine if this was an anime like it so obviously wants to be, but when it's a game, that's a pretty big problem. However, the worst problem about the game is that the game's true ending, I kid you not, is downloadable content. Never in the history of anything has anyone had the staggering audacity to release a game at $60 and then charge you more money to unlock the last few episodes of the game, which you then have to download, which could be worse if you don't have an internet connection or you don't have an Xbox Live or PlayStation Network account. The fact that Asura's Wrath was published by Capcom, a publisher that's gained infamy as of late for their DLC policies, has given people a pretty good idea as to who came up with this idea. But in all frank honesty, I don't care who came up with it. I don't care if Capcom came up with it or CyberConnect 2, or even Brian Blessed. Regardless of who came up with the idea, it's just a really, really freaking dumb, stupid idea. Okay, angry rant over. Now, even though Asura's Wrath as a whole would rather play with itself, there are a few good things about it. First of all, the graphics are actually very good. Even though the game runs on the now cliched Unreal Engine 3, it's used in a way that makes it stand out amongst other Unreal games with very unique stylized character models that express even the most subtle of motions wonderfully, interesting environments that aren't always different shades of brown as expected with most Unreal games, and even the infamous texture pop-in problem where textures don't appear on models for several seconds, giving them a very amateurish look, has been drastically reduced. The music, while forgettable in parts, is excellent and varied, with some songs being epic orchestral melodies playing during the heat of battle, and other songs using more Asian-style instruments to suit what's going on. And major points have to go to the very awesome and catchy Western-like theme of Yasha, Asura's rival and one of the 7 deities.
You are a fool. Next time, do not come back. You're Yasha. Asura, why have you come back?
Asura's Wrath also earns major points for having some of the silliest yet most epic boss battles in the history of gaming. For example, the very first boss of the game grows to a size larger than the planet he and Asura are fighting on. Seriously, his love breast alone is the size of Asia, and then goes to squish Asura with his country-sized index finger of death. And in another boss battle, an armless Asura summons the spirit of Zinedine Zidane as he headbutts one of the 7 deities through a series of massive rocks. And if you can ignore the fact that the game seriously doesn't want you around, it's actually an absolute ton of fun with all sorts of insane, ridiculous bosses and scenarios to experience, massive epic fights against unique and gigantic enemies, and quite possibly the greatest tribute to anime fanservice in the history of anything. And it's actually quite compelling, which is a bit weird even though the main character is a screaming lunatic that happens to have 6 arms, and please don't ask about that. In conclusion, Asura's Wrath is a pretty decent game with great graphics, excellent and varied music, some of the most awesome yet utterly insane bosses in gaming, and if you don't consider it as a proper game, it's probably the funnest game in the whole world. However, the gameplay can become tedious. The amount of time watching cutscenes compared to playing the game is nuts. The ending is locked off as DLC for no reason, and the game seriously wants you to just watch the nonsense and actually control it. In one way, CyberConnect 2 have fulfilled their desire to make an anime comparable to the likes of DBZ or Evangelion, since if Asura's Wrath was an anime, it would be truly brilliant. However, Asura's Wrath is not an anime, but a game. And as a game, there are a lot of problems that have to be worked out before it can be considered anything more than an interesting but flawed experiment. And so, Asura's Wrath gets a rating of actually decent. In this case, there are a few things that make this surprisingly fun, but it could be much better if its flaws were sorted out.